Thank you for joining the panel and, of course, being at NASCOM as well at the event. Let's just get started. So, Ashwin, you have an interesting perspective. I mean, you've managed on the business side, on the product side, and then moved on to the CIO role. You also managed operations, I mean, in the US, and you also managed operations in India. So I think you have an interesting mix of perspectives. So what are your, I mean, when you look at technology acquisition, so when and for what kind of solution do you look at startups?
Before that, thanks for having me here. Let me give you a brief context and an introduction first of who KLA-Tencor is, and then who I am and what my background is. That'll help in setting the frame and the context. So KLA-Tencor is not a well-known brand inside of India, even though we have a captive center in Chennai. But we are a leading semiconductor equipment company based out of Milpitas, California. We have around about 6,000 people. Roughly, our revenues for the last year were about $3.2 billion. And because of our equipment that is in process control for the chip industries, we are innovating on Moore's Law. So every chip that is really manufactured today in the world, we have a profound impact on each one of them, because no chip could come to a product without seeing a KLA-Tencor equipment at some point in its life cycle. So that's how profound an impact we are having to the semiconductor industry, and especially talking about digital, right? So that's the kind of company, and we've always been an analytics company. For 35 years, before the word big data was even known, we were always a humongous data company. And so it's only now that you hear the word big data. But that's the background of the company. For me personally, I went to actually, I'm from Bangalore originally, grew up here, and I was telling somebody that when I moved here from Bombay in '73, there were 50,000 people in Bangalore. And today there are 7.5 million people. So I went to Frank Anthony, St. Joseph's College, REC Surathkal, and then got my PhD in material science from the University of Maryland. And then I joined KLA-Tencor 14 years ago as head of product marketing. Then ran engineering, product development, program management, general management. And like Ramesh pointed out, I came back as an expat to run our operations out of Chennai before becoming the CIO in 2009. So I've been the CIO now since 2009. So that's the background of having business, product, marketing, knowledge, and then trying to get the IT technologies to work together, right? So that's the impact. And so it's not only about technology, it's about bringing technology to solve business problems. And we'll get into some of the details later as to what impacts both startups and conventional companies have in this ecosystem.
So when do you, I mean, what do you look for in startups, when you look at startups?
Yeah, I mean, so here's the thing that I have to tell you, especially in the era of the budgets being tight, right? The startup needs to take something out, because I've always said that IT organizations have been great in adding things. We've always bought new things. I think today, the era of the startup is how to subtract things. And when you subtract, you got to take something out in order to get something in, right? And that is my single piece of advice to startups. It should be a complete solution. It's not something complementary to what I have. It is a replacement for something I have at a fraction of the cost that I currently have.
Interesting perspective. Fully spoken like a CIO.
Yes.
So Pankaj, in your experience, I mean, like in the days of in TCS selling to enterprises, and then now working with an enterprise, and I'm sure even here, probably initial days, you were selling to Sony as a parent from Sony India, but now I'm sure it's matured enough that you're now dealing with vendors yourself. Yeah. What do you look for? I mean, like you said you have looked at startups, you've already adopted some startup solutions. What kind of solutions do you think startups fit in?
So just some background. See, we are still a corporation, big company, and we have a lot of rules and regulations around who we can work with, who we cannot. So when we are looking for a solution, and when it comes to us, there are certain things that we definitely look out for, even today, in this day and age. The size, the market share, number of customers, who is backing you, how long you have been into the market, what are your references, so on and so forth. So that's the typical, an entry criteria for most of the folks who work for us. But what has happened, Ramesh, in the last 18, 20 months is that we were in this mode of growth and bringing in as much of solutions and technologies as possible in the last 10 to 12 years. The audience would not know, Sony Pictures Entertainment, that's the company that I work for. IT was not very organized in the entertainment sector for a very, very long period of time. It's only been in the last 7, 8 years, 9 years that there is a standard that has flown in. So it was building, but we reached a point where we started to incur a lot of technical debt, and the technical debt is once something is outdated, then there is replacement, then refresh, and so on and so forth. And that was an inflection point for us. How do we look at again complementing to what Ashwin was saying earlier, that how do I go back and look at certain solutions where I can deal with some of these complexities that I have in my landscape. So beyond the traditional points that I talked about earlier, now we also look at, okay, what is your solution? How does it solve my problem? How does it facilitate my customers? Because one of the things that is a very big problem for us, once a solution is into our enterprise, how to train my users. And look at it this way, Sony Pictures is only a 7,000 employee organization, is spread across 70, 80 countries, generating $8.4 billion of revenue. So you can see, per capita revenue generation is very high because we create a lot of intellectual property. And our users have lived in this culture for 20, 30 years. So it becomes very difficult for us to introduce anything new. So this is where, and again, I would say startups have kind of given us this perspective that it is by and large not going to be a lot of disruption. We will present you and bring to you something very simple, which is not going to take up a lot of your energy, both in terms of implementation as well as training.
They should solve a pain.
Solve a pain, yeah. And some other factors that I should tell you, what we look into startups are, very important, is that, how nimble, flexible, and obviously, how strong and enthusiastic, energetic the management team is. Because if they are strong, enthusiastic, and forward-looking, then their ability to deal with uncertainties is high. So one of the things that we are skeptical about startups is, what is the viability? How long they will be into the market? And once you have a strong management team, people backing you, you have strategic alliances, that gives us a lot of comfort when we talk to startups.
So Raj, you have an interesting perspective. I mean, early days of TIBCO, like you said, I never look at TIBCO as a startup, but then yes, they were a startup at one point. From those days and becoming a large technology provider, selling to enterprises, and then now in your current role working with startups again, and I'm sure many of them are selling to enterprises. What do you see are the differences? You've seen both sides, large product company, a small company, and both selling to enterprises. So what are the differences?
So the first thing is, it's CIO's job to say no to you as a startup, as somebody who is selling you. Right? And it's rightly so, because they get 100 of startups and non-startup guys knocking on the door. Our job, and I'm really putting it myself as a sales guy trying to sell to CIOs, right? My job, essentially, is to convince them that I have something that is going to change their life. Right? So number one issue is, unless you can figure out that you have something that's going to take CIO's attention, because you're really going to change their pain or make their competitive life easier, you shouldn't be talking to CIO. Go find somebody else to sell to. Having said so, and I sort of just remember one of my first startup stories. So this is the time when TIBCO was really 3-person and a dog in a garage in Palo Alto, California. We were actually selling to one of the largest bank in the US. And as usual, most banks have a headquarters in New York. And we were actually selling them one of the trading solutions. So we started with their technical guys, and we were competing against some of the largest suppliers at that time for the trading solutions. And the advantage we had was we were nimble, we were smaller, we were more responsive. So we managed to, on a technical level, get all the qualifications done. And we thought that we got the deal. But then we got a call from the CIO saying that he would like to personally meet with us. so we thought, oh, this must be the final time to go and get a final nod. We go there, and now imagine this picture in the 70s banks in New York on a 44th floor in a CIO office, which is an office what 1/3 the size of this hall. And two guys, two of us, one 26-year-old and one about 31-year-old kid, going to meet with somebody the age of Ashwin, with 45 years or 40 years of experience. So we go there, we had actually rehearsed the whole thing, we had basically said, you know why we are good, all that kind of stuff. So we go there, and the CIO basically says, yeah, we've looked at all of this, but tell me, why should I purchase your stuff? So we said, oh, that's the question that we are prepared for. So we go through for 5 minutes saying, you know, we are fast, we are cheap, we are better, we have done every benchmark that you wanted, and we have aced it, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. We go on for about 5 minutes. After we stopped, he sort of looked at it and said, but why do you think I should buy that? So both of us were Indian. So first, in the beginning, we thought that maybe he didn't ever understand our accent. So we said, okay, let's try something different. So we basically repeat the same story slowly with a different accent, trying to explain it. Go through that again for 5 minutes. After the 5 minutes, the guy asked exactly the same question, but why do you think I should really buy this? Then my colleague, the CEO, actually had a light bulb. He said, you know, sir, don't buy this because we are a better company, or in terms of better software, we are faster, cheaper, et cetera. You want to buy because we will make you successful. We have the fire in our eyes to make sure that you will not be let down. And that was the end of the conversation. Then the reality was, I mean, obviously what he wanted to know, and the message here is, a lot more than software, et cetera. What matters is you have to give a confidence to them that you are going to deliver no matter what happens. They don't have time to sort of try out these things. And if you can't give them, particularly CIO, that type of a confidence, again, don't go sell them. Go to sell somebody else.
That's very interesting. I think at some level, even Pankaj touched upon it. Yes, it is. I think that's the reason startups, they come with a different energy and enthusiasm and confidence. I think that's part of, why you would go with a startup. So Pankaj, you've seen, when you deal with vendors and also as in your other roles, you've seen companies here and in the US, and also as a vendor. From a startup standpoint, what do you think would be the differences if they were, naturally, if an Indian startup, they would start by selling to Indian enterprises before they venture outside. So they would have, if they're venturing outside, they would have probably already sold to Indian enterprises. Yes. What do you think would be the differences, selling to an Indian enterprise and selling to a global enterprise?
See, I think the primary, as far as I can tell you from my experience, would be their ability to sell to that culture and that mindset, right? Because if you have not lived in a particular geography, then what I think would be the biggest barrier there would be the trust, the relationship, the connect, and that you can create in the marketplace. I think that's one thing that will definitely kind of haunt you if you do not, have those connections. So let us just keep that aside, because what I'm talking about is probably, is something that you will achieve over a period of time. So beyond that, if a startup, is able to still be able to present a compelling case around my problem and have a global outlook around the product and the strategy, then still there is a chance for the startup to get an entry into the door. What I mean is that there are 2-3 things which have become quite important in the last 2-3 years, right? So security and compliance, regulations, statutory, all these things are also becoming equally important. Now, when a startup today is bringing in a product and trying to tell us what the quality and what are the functionalities, in the product, before you actually get into that conversation, there are a lot of leading questions that are going to be asked to you, right? Your stability, your ability to serve us for the longer term, your ability to support us for our specific requirements. I think the earlier panel was talking about customization and things like that. How do you support an enterprise when you are a startup and I have my unique requirements? So I think these would be the key things where I think startups would have to focus upon before they really venture into the world outside India and look at companies, let's say for example in the United States or Europe.
So talking about access, Ashwin, you've kind of been just before your current role, you were in India, running the India operations. So you can kind of understand the personalities in both the roles. Do you think such a role is an avenue to reach the global CxO? Can you go try and sell, because going outside to the valley and selling is kind of, it takes some time. As a first initial few leads, do you think their India entities is a good avenue to go sell to the global?
Actually, Ramesh, if you look at it, even in Silicon Valley, most of the pitches are made to us from startups from Indians, right? So it's an Indian who's coming in, who's in Silicon Valley. So when you go in, it is not about we discriminate that this is a Silicon Valley company or a US company or a European company or an Asian company. Our view is, what problem are you solving? Are you able to articulate the problem that we have? And that is the more important point. Yeah, after that comes the credibility bit that Raj alluded to, is the credibility and the commitment. Are you going to be there for me? And do I trust you to be there for me? And that is an earned quantity. Now, that's what we don't know when we are between these two places. But right off the bat, we are always looking at that entrepreneur who says, I do know your problem, and I have a unique way to solve your problem.
But do you think the India, I mean, until they've established their sales presence in the US,
exactly,
they can come and knock on the door multiple times. In the initial days, do you think the India entity is an avenue to pass that message, that they can solve the problem?
I mean, here's my point of view, which may be out there. Here's the view, is that it is who's the risk-taking profile. It's not the Indian company that's going to take that risk, I'm sorry. Okay?
Yeah.
So if you're going to say and establish that first 20 companies here in India, you're going to take a too long a time, and you may have missed that whole cycle. My whole point is you go to the early adopters, no matter where they are. And that's the important thing, rather than location-based. Right? And I think that is my advice in many of those places, is to find these actual early adopters, those risk takers, and how can you make that commitment that you're there for them? And that's my point of view. So I'll give you an example from my own kind of background. So many of you know that the iPad first came out in April of 2010. And so we had a great quarter in the June quarter of that very year. And in July of 2010, all 6,000 of our employees got a gift from the company with an iPad, right? And so we from the IT organization said, the company is going to give this gift to the employees. How can we make the employees more productive on the gift that we gave? And so then our challenge was, how do you put a certificate on the device so that it can get connected to the network? What do you think our options were at that point? Call the help desk. And if you have to call the help desk, how many tickets would each device need? 3 tickets at least. 18,000 tickets in a short period of time. What do you think the user experience is going to be? So what are the alternatives at that point? So we reached out to a small startup, and luckily we found one in the Bay Area that was providing an MDM solution. Because at that point, BlackBerry decided they didn't want to play in that MDM space for the iOS device. So the only solution that really worked at that point was a startup. They committed to put all of their 5 people in our enterprise, so that by July of 2010, in a period of 2 weeks, we seamlessly were able to get all the 6,000 iPads authenticated, got a certificate, got email, calendar, and contacts working. So if not for that startup and the choice of saying we want to take that risk, that wouldn't have happened.
So on that note, how did you locate that startup?
So,
I'm sure that's what startups would look for.
No, so there are a number of ways in which startups actually reach out to us in many ways, right? And we are fortunate that in being in Silicon Valley, and I'm on the ventures board, advisory board, and they bring in all of these companies to me, and my teams. And so we get exposure, and my advice is you should get into one of these kinds of boards so that you can go and pitch your products to CIOs and their teams. And so that's how we got some visibility on this particular company.
So again, on the same note, going global, so Raj, you probably have a good exposure to this. On what should a startup that hasn't been selling outside of India yet, and they decide to go, this may apply to any startup, but specifically Indian startups, what kind of preparedness should they, I'm sure it's not just one day they decide to go and talk to a company in the US and they may get lucky. If they're solving a compelling problem, they might get lucky, but if not, what all could they do before they go approach a customer in the US?
Yeah. So first, actually, I cannot more than, I mean, I absolutely second your idea, which is don't go to a company that may be easier to sell to. Go to a company that is innovator. They are the leaders in that particular industry. And so the first preparation you need to do is to figure out whatever you're going to, who are the leaders in that company, or in that segment. The reason is they are the ones who are the risk takers. They are the ones who would actually value, if you have something unique to offer, they are the ones who would actually value your offering. And there are very few. So if you look at semiconductor manufacturing side of it, right? Intel, for a long period of time, not just because they're the largest, but they were the guys who, for any, even the processing situation, if you can convince Intel, you'll be able to convince everybody else. If you go into bank, it's Goldman Sachs. If you can convince Goldman Sachs or Morgan Stanley, everybody else will sort of follow. So you need to, first thing you need to do is to figure out who those guys are. And it's absolutely essential. Don't try to sell to a second or a third tier guy from here, because you won't go very far. The second thing is, frankly, if you have 5 installations or 5 customers in India or 20, it's probably not going to matter to a US or a European CIO, because the scale sizes are so different that they generally are not going to pay as much attention to it. The third is you do want to, in that sense, again, back to, you need to find such a compelling reason that CIO has a reason to call you, not you to call him. For example, internally, when I used to do my sales reviews, for every customer, every sales guy who would come up with their prospect, our question to the sales guy was, why would CIO at 8 o'clock in the morning on Monday call you? Do you have that level of understanding of his problem, and does he know that you can solve it? You can solve it. That's the relationship, and that's a guideline. So what you need to do, particularly from selling from India, first you need to be there. I don't think if you're selling it in enterprise, you can sell from any serious solution, you can sell from here. And the reason is, again, the business, in my view, it's not the product you are selling. You're selling everything. You're selling yourself, you're selling trust, you're selling relationship. And people buy from people. I just cannot overemphasize that portion. And that cannot be done on a Skype or on a telephone or any other mechanisms. So if you're really selling an enterprise solution, and I'm really emphasizing the enterprise part, you're selling an enterprise solution, you really need to be physically there. There is just no other alternative.
So on that note, I mean, talking about physically being there, if both of you, when you see somebody coming and pitching to you, especially Ashwin, since you would meet people in the US, what kind of person would you think is the right person to come and pitch to you? Has to be one of the founders, or do you think some seasoned salesperson that sold similar software? What kind of person would you like to see that would give you the confidence?
Actually, this may sound a little provocative, but my advice, I know Raj will have his own side of this story. Don't pitch directly to the CIO. I think that is, at least in my book, a cardinal sin. The first kind of message and the first contact cannot be the CIO. And in many of these cases, this is not dictated into the organization. And for all of us, there are so many moving parts that the CIO has to pay attention to, the last of which is going to be some startup that you want to take some risk on. I know you have
Yeah, so I have, just as a comment, this is a message you're going to get from most CIOs, right? Our job as a sales guy is to create a value proposition that he's willing to listen to it, right? And if you can't create it, don't absolutely follow his advice. Go to somebody at a lower level and start from there. But
that's the point, right? I mean, I think you hit the nail on the head. If you can get that lucky that you can intersect of what is keeping me up at night, and it so happens that you can intersect that point, then I got it. That means your message should be that crisp that this is what the problem is. And just so that I can give you some pointers today of what keeps me up at night, I think it's this intersection that we had, and I know Pankaj alluded to that, the intersection of security, privacy, and user experience. That's the intersection where I think guys like me stay up all night, because we don't know what the threat is, so we'll add a lot of stuff to secure it, which means the user experience is not that great, and then if I monitor too much, then I'm monitoring the privacy. So what solutions that you guys can get in those intersections, I think, are opportunities for entrepreneurs to kind of get these solutions to these problems.
So Ashwin, I absolutely agree with you, and this is a key message, right? Don't try to sell, in that sense, what you have. Listen to these guys in terms of what their needs are. And if you don't have that, go back to your garage, build something that actually fits their needs. Because otherwise, it's not going to be interesting to them.
So the person who's pitching doesn't matter to you. It's what they're pitching. Like if it somehow resonates with a problem you're facing at that point, that's more important than who is pitching.
Yes, I mean, it doesn't matter. Actually, we're more technically inclined. At that point, we're taking a risk. We want to understand the technical architecture and how this scales in. So the more technical you are at that point.
So for which most likely is going to be the founder. So
yes,
have one of the founders.
One of the founders do come in at that point, and it's that whole team. And Raj alluded to it. Who's going to give you the trust to say, I'm the founder, CEO, I've got this thing, I've got a lot to think. So that's an important thing. And many a time, you know, the startup is 5 or 6 people, and they're all there on that pitch.
That's
okay,
true.
That's it, and that also shows the commitment that, hey, the company is all betting on you. Should I be betting on them?
Yes.
And so that's what happens many a time. And I gave you this example of this MDM company. I tell you, all 5 people were in my office, and that gave me the credibility. And then I gave them space in the office, and they came through. And when they came through, I talked about them. And so it was a win for all parties. But my message is, again, the first person is not the CIO. Get somebody on my team, because the CIO's ideas are not the best ideas either. Okay? So I think that's one of the things that startups do make that sin to say, oh, I got a contact, I'll reach out to the CIO. And many a times, you won't get a response from the CIO. And you'll be disappointed at that point.
So Pankaj, if often startups, I see many, even small startups, there may be 10, 15 people, when they make the first foray into markets outside of India, they think they have to get at least one person on board. Like say if they're selling in the US, get somebody on board in the US, full-time, part-time, that can, in some form, open doors. How important do you think that is?
I think it does carry some level of importance, you know, for them to be able to get that, you know, first sale done to a US enterprise.
So it's to open the doors or to make the pitch? Like, I mean, the pitch they should still make, like Ashwin said, the founders have to be there when they go make the pitch.
See, on that subject, I would say that, you know, for an enterprise like ours, I think it is very clear that it has to be either one of the, you know, founders, co-founders, or someone very, very responsible and senior. Why? Because one, you are a startup. Second, you know, you need to prove something to me. One, at least, you know, that you've got a compelling reason on why I should buy your product or service. Second is that, you know, questions regarding the organization as such would come in that discussion when you are pitching for the first time being a startup. And if you are not someone who is a part and parcel of the organization, like a founder, co-founder, or a very senior person, it will not create a lot of confidence in front of a CIO or a senior person as in the delegation to be able to convince that, okay, yeah, I do have the answer to your strategic questions like roadmaps, the product, the backing, the management team, so on and so forth.
So you need a person to kind of help with the channels and open the door, but eventually one of the founders have to be there.
I would strongly recommend.
So, and many other times, it's actually always helpful if you do have some venture-backed funder who's funding you.
So that could be one of the avenues.
Yes, and that's the credibility that we are also reaching for, because many a time we have relationship with these venture people. And it's a very symbiotic relationship, because some of the funding is also done. If you don't have venture-backed funding, then have you tried the product, Ashwin, is a typical time which then gets them the funding that they want, right? So it's that symbiotic relationship that sometimes it comes from the venture itself, that the venture kinds of people call us, and the others, we are excited about this technology, and we want to make it survive, and therefore we want to make sure that they get the venture funding, and then they go mainstream.
Both ways.
Right?
Yeah.
So it's both ways.
See, on that same note, one other thing becomes, at least for us, it has become very important in the past, is that how focused you are when you are selling your product to me. What does focus mean? If you are trying to solve one problem, but then are bundling too many things around it and making your product very, very expansive, then again, it becomes very difficult for me to absorb it. Because being an organization, an enterprise, which is there in the marketplace for 25, 30 years, I already have a lot of technical stuff lined up in my data center along with so many softwares and solutions, right? And I do have an entry barrier for anything, as he was talking about, to get into my landscape. So if you are trying to solve too many things at the same time, then you may find it very difficult to sell.
And also you lose the
so
credibility.
keep it very simple.
Yeah, you may lose the credibility that you can do everything well.
Everything
so
well.
Focus
yes.
is very important.
And just to add to what Ashwin said, when you pitch in and then you have a VC or an angel investor backing you, I think that also creates a lot of credibility when you come and pitch it to us.
So that's the avenue part. There's also a culture part, Raj. Raj, you might have, especially with your portfolio companies that you're working with now. Maybe you don't see it as much because they're probably all based in the US, but if a company were to be based in India and tried selling to the US, do you think there are any culture considerations, like, not that they should change their culture, awareness of the US, the business
absolutely.
environment, and like how to,
absolutely.
the mechanics of going in?
The mechanics, the interaction, etc. So, but I don't have a lot of experience in terms of mentoring Indian startup that the founder had no US or European experience. So I can't really directly tell you that, but my reaction is that it's very clear that the difference is pretty significant. Actually, another way of thinking about it is, I remember going to China to sell, and I could see the barrier that I was facing. Not just the language kind of a barrier, but cultural kind of a barrier. So in that sense, I think it is absolutely critical. If you do not have a significant exposure to America in terms of culture, in terms of how people do business, what do body languages mean? How do you, when somebody says something, what does it really mean? I think you don't waste your time. Don't sell to US. Because particularly US is one market where it's very noisy, right? Noisy in the sense that there are thousands of people trying to sell lots of things. It's the largest market, so it's the hardest in that way to penetrate. And it's easier to go, in one particular case, I realized that it was hard for that founder to do it. So basically we decided that he should go to Southeast Asia, he should go to really more remote location where the markets are a little more protected. So that's another way you can actually go sell global.
So on a personal note, though I didn't know you earlier, like we were discussing before, so Pramati came and sold to you. I was not involved, I was studying engineering at the time. So what was it like, when they came, sold to you, that's a good example of an Indian company, technology company, coming and selling, and I remember at that time they still hadn't sold much in the US.
No,
so what appealed to you when they came and sold?
Actually, it's a very good example. So just as a background, Pramati was a Hyderabad-based company, probably 7 or 12 people at that time.
When they first came to you, must have been a little more than that.
A little more than that. Yeah. But the founder, there was a fairly small, the key team. And what impressed us was, and they were actually into an app server, essentially, essentially in a product company. So the first thing that was very interesting to us was this was an Indian company selling just a product. So that actually differentiated Pramati right on day one. Which is because normally always we have seen guys who come and say I have a product, but really they're selling services.
So it's like goes back to Pankaj's point on focus.
On
so
focus.
The focus was there.
Focus was very clear. The second thing was clearly technology. It was very clear that they knew what they were talking about. Not so much as a product, but the 4 or 5 people that we interacted with on a regular basis, They really knew their stuff. And frankly, that was the only reason. And then the reason we actually did not go beyond it was culture issue. We realized that it would take them a long time. Actually, more specifically, here more than a business, we were thinking of buying it. Yeah. That was the angle. And we realized that it would take a lot longer for us to integrate them because of the cultural differences that would lie. Because most of those guys had actually never worked or sold in the US.
Yes, absolutely. It's completely homegrown.
I mean, just on that line, if you just look at it, I mean, we talk about the credibility of Indian companies. You know, if you had said prior to 2000 that many of us in the US would outsource support to India, would you have believed it? No, right? What happened post 2000, right? What happened is that we built the credibility that it's okay to do business with Indian companies. So there is a brand that is then recognized. And if you just look at it in parallel, and that's what we do with Israeli companies today, the best security comes out of Israel, okay? So we go and into that environment to say that they have the competence, they have the credibility, and therefore we are working with Israeli startups, right? And it's the same thing. So what is your core competence? Like Raj clearly said, it's the signal to noise. It's too noisy. What is your signal? And enhance your signal. And I think that's the way to look at this thing, rather than, hey, you know what, I got this mobile app, I'm in analytics, I'm in this, and I'm in that. You can't be all things to all people. So what is your core competence? Why is it that you have the core competence? What is unique in your value proposition? That's what you got to refine, and you got to pitch in that 30 seconds. That 30-second pitch is the most important value proposition pitch. And so that's what I think will gain the credibility. And it requires one or two companies to step up there to bring that ecosystem in play.
Yeah, I think the clarity, it's not about the time. I'm sure everybody has more time to listen, but if you can't say it in 30 seconds, you're not clear.
Yes.
I think that's what will eventually kind of undo the whole. Yeah, Pankaj, you're saying.
There is another dimension of this time, you know, when you are working on a product, you know, at what time you bring that product into the market, you know, that is also very important. Because in your appetite to build as much as you want to, you should not lose that critical time when that product is actually required into the market. If you lose that, then it is going to be very difficult for you to take it forward.
But there is also this other trade-off, right?
Yeah.
The other trade-off is how, again, how innovative is the customer that you're trying to go to?
Yeah, true.
There are, so as a startup, my always model is I'm willing to sacrifice everything, but I want to make sure that everything else except the product has to be so unique. Again, because of this noise issue, the product or whatever you're selling has to be so unique that you get attention even if you don't have a demo to show. Point being that particularly when if you're in India and you're thinking about selling somewhere to the US, you don't have money and you don't have time to do marketing. What you want to do is your sales is your marketing in that sense. Yes. If you cannot in 30 seconds get enough attention, maybe you are not expressing what your value proposition is, but assuming that you can articulate that, then it's not compelling enough. These guys are not going to find interesting. These guys or his team, I mean their team also.
Yes. So we have 6 minutes left, so we can take a few questions. How many are startups here? So I'm sure you'll have some questions.
Yeah.
If at all you're thinking.
If you don't have, I'll start asking questions to you.
If you're sitting in this room on a afternoon, then I'm sure like you have some interest. Yes, please. We can just speak up. I think we can hear.
Yeah. I really enjoyed the panel discussion, and it's enlightening to see some ground level experiences that you have shared. If your product or solution has a technology component, but is really solving a problem of a different part of the business, would you really build the interest and the stakeholder engagement in that part of the business before you go to the technology guys? And I'm talking supply chain as an example.
So you're talking from the startup standpoint. When you sell, who should you sell to?
If you have a supply chain solution, and companies have a different organization that handles supply chain components, but at the end of the day, it will have a technology enabler. I'm just trying to understand, get your thoughts on what should be your strategy as a startup.
It's a good point. I mean, if it's most of the enterprise solutions are business solutions. Though they're technology, but they're solving a business. But so do you sell to the business first, or do you sell to the technology? I mean, CIO or the...
No, many of these things, I mean, and today in this era, I mean, I think, you know, previously, you know, the IT kind of environment was well-grounded. I had control. And today in the SaaS-based world, IT doesn't have that much control. You know, it can take control by being the leader, and in many of cases, we are not the experts in the supply chain. Let's be brutally honest. Okay, you may have an SME in your team that doesn't make you a supply chain kind of specialist. And our view is we would bring that business partner and introduce them to you to say, does this solve a problem for you? And that's what we would then partner and then help in the integration, because the business person doesn't know how it fits into the architecture. What is the security kind of play? How is this scalable? How is this available globally? They don't know that. So our view is that we would get that business person for that line of business and bring them to you to say, is this exciting to you? And many a times, we are open to startups reaching out directly to our lines of businesses, because we aren't the experts in many of those areas, and we should be enablers. We have taken the thing that I'm a true business partner of yours, and if I'm a partner, I'm enabling you. And so enabling doesn't mean I have to have control. I don't know if that makes sense, but that's how we approach those problems. Yeah.
So I'll just add actually a couple of things. So first concept is, in any large organization, you're probably going to have multiple entry points. And by entry points, I mean, I guess you get it. So the second thing is, different organization, in my experience, have different companies, enterprises, have a different relationship between IT and businesses, et cetera. So one of the things you do need to figure out is exactly who is making those decisions. And then it varies. He's absolutely right that the movement clearly has going more and more towards the business side. However, there are more and more, I mean, there are many, many organizations. If you look at particularly the investment banks kinds of companies, the trading companies, they tend to, telecom companies, they tend to actually have IT guys still dominate that decision-making process. As you go more towards manufacturing companies, retail companies, you're going to see more and more business influence coming in. So the two basic concepts, one, there are always entry points, so don't assume that there's only one entry point. And secondly, figure out for that specific customer, what are the valid entry points for the problem, I mean, basically the solution you're trying to propose.
So understanding the dynamics is very important of their industry and specifically of their company.
For that customer.
Now, especially the politics. I mean, you don't want to be caught in the politics. Yes. Because if it's a controlling IT organization and you put this play, then it's going to get you into trouble. Yes. Right? Your entry will be stopped right there. So it's for you to, as an entrepreneur, you know, you should be adaptable into saying, what is the politics of this?
Yes, it's a very difficult game for any company, but yes, I think it's important. You figure that out somehow.
Yes.
I'm sure we have the old boys network, alumni networks. Yes. Hopefully you have somebody that's working there.
Yeah. So one thing that is, I mean, I'm sure it should be obvious to you that particularly in IT in all of US, I mean, basically the South Asians dominated. Right? There is no organization that I know of. As a matter of fact, we used to run when I was running sales, one of the things we had in the headquarters was a little sales group of a bunch of Indians. Every time my sales guy encountered an Indian person, the instruction was, send the name and some information about the person back to us. We'll find you a connection. Right? And this, my back office group, which was consisted of a bunch of Indians, whose job was to figure out the network and figure out, this is the LinkedIn, pre-LinkedIn days, figure out through internal mechanisms, who do we know? There were times when I've gone through actually a temple to the guy, because we figured out that this guy is a strong supporter, he's a CIO, a strong supporter of a particular temple in Louisiana.
I know, whatever it takes.
Whatever it takes.
Absolutely, yes.
In typical enterprises, we have two types of functions, core functions and support functions. And also we have software that either resides in-house on the servers or outside in the cloud as SaaS. For Indian startups, which would be an easier beachhead? Where should they establish their initial beachhead? Where should they focus? Which is easier to start? Because as you all said, it's not an easy thing to conquer. It's very tough. Should we go the fresh desk approach or should we go something else?
So 2 points. I think one, I talked about the focus that you should definitely have when you are trying to pitch to an organization outside India. It could be a very, very small core part of the business first. And second, figure out that niche that you want to serve, at least to start with. Even when you are working on a core business process that you would have picked up for your startup company, and then you are bringing that functionality into a product that you have thought of venturing into, I think when you work on the core, make sure that there is a niche of that particular business process that is kind of incorporated in the product, because that's the area which will get you the compelling reason that all panelists were talking about, for you to be able to get the ears of the person to whom you are trying to sell.
I mean, just to add to that, I mean, in my view, there's a support part of IT, there's an enabling part of IT, and then I'll talk about the third part of IT, which I think will be of more value to you. So let me talk about that first. The first and foremost, the IT organizations have enormous assets, and our view now is to monetize these assets. And that's a new area that IT organizations want to go and venture into, because we've got a lot of data that is sitting there dormant, not doing anything. If you guys can come up with solutions to monetize those assets, that's an area that we would love to engage with you. Because the IT organization is no longer just your support organization. It is now going to be, and my view is that every company today is an IT company. There is no company that is not an IT company. And so the IT organization, for a change, is in the driver's seat. So whatever you can do to help monetize, which means generate cash or revenue. Support, in my view, commodity is support today in many of those cases. And commodity will always be bought at spot price. So if you want to work on a support kind of area, there is very little margin to be made. So you would rather work more on a top line rather than the bottom line, because the bottom line is a finite line, the top line is an infinite line, right? So
very well put. Yeah. So last word, I've already got signal from Sangeeta that we're running out of time. Right. Just one line advice or a consideration that a startup should keep in mind before going global. Ashwin? I
mean, my thing is singular focus on what your value proposition is. Understand the problem that you're solving and how you're able to articulate, and you should get me to play back what the problem is. And if you've got me to that point, then you got the sale.
Pankaj?
Yeah, sure. So what I would add is that, focus upon areas that that still are open for an enterprise where they are looking to venture into. I think I would actually say something that Raj talked about, is that who are the people whose interest you can get quickly. I think that's where the crux is for people like you who are having all these startups. I think that's what you should really focus upon figuring it out.
Raj?
So apart from passion, one more situation is, I call it content. Right? From an Indian startup standpoint, the US CIO is going to pay attention really when you add true technology value. Because that's the differentiation. Again, it's going back to the angle of, just like he said, Israel is known for security. People do respect South Asians as having content. So you focus on making sure that you know more about the topic that you're discussing than anybody else.
So it's all boils down to almost what they are doing, not how. So long as they're solving a problem and doing it well, that's the most important.
We have always said, what is your core competence? Focus on your core competence. Don't tell me, oh, this guy told me to do this, and then I'll do that. Because we'll trick you too. Oh, can you do this? And if you say yes, I know the answer. Right? So that's what Raj says. That singular passion that this is going to change the world for you, Ashwin, you don't know this. And how you can then play it back, that I got it, and say, okay, this is why I should engage with you.
Makes a lot of sense. So thank you so much, Raj, Ashwin, and Pankaj.